Hello, fellow adventurers, and welcome back to another episode of Word Safari. In this episode, we are going to develop some themes that we've been looking at in some previous safaris by looking at one particular Latin root. That Latin root is the root duke. The Latin root duke means to lead, and as a verb, it just means to lead, but as a noun, it means leader, so the noun was dukes. And we have already seen this in one particular place when we were looking at different leader words, because we saw the noun duke, which comes straight from this Latin root dukes. However, this Latin root gives us a lot of derivatives that come from the verb duco, which simply means to lead. That verb duco has a past participle, ductum, so you just put this tum ending that is the past participle ending in Latin. Just a brief refresher as to what a past participle is. It's an adjective that describes a noun that has had that verb's action done to it. So if you have been led somewhere, led is our past participle in English. So led and ductum are basically equivalents in English and Latin. The reason I'm telling you this is because we get words from both the regular verb duco and the past participle ductum. So sometimes you will see that T ending on it, and sometimes you won't, but don't let that confuse you because they all come from this Latin root duke. One particular word that we have that comes from the past participle ductum is just our word duct, and you can see that duct has the T on the end. Again, don't let that confuse you. The reason we call something a duct is because it leads from one place to another, and more specifically, it leads usually air from one place to another, and that's really why we call it a duct. So there's nothing fancy about that meaning. That's really all that it's trying to tell us. However, we're going to dive more deeply into this duke root and not just look at words like duke or duct, but we are going to look at a whole family of words in Latin that comes from this duke root. We're going to look at specifically compounds. Now, last episode, we talked about how Latin likes to make compounds out of verbs, and those compounds are made up of prepositions plus the verb root together to sort of modify the meaning of the verb in some way, shape, or form. And so in this episode, we're going to be looking at compounds of duke and different English words that we get from those various compounds. Now, the first one we're going to look at is conduct. Conduct is made up of the duke root with the T at the end, plus the preposition cone to make a compound out of it. Now, there are different meanings of the word conduct in English, and maybe you've never thought about this, but you can conduct a symphony or you can conduct electricity. Hopefully you don't conduct electricity because that sounds painful, but something is conducting electricity, wires or whatever, right? So why do we use the same word conduct for both symphonies and electricity? Well, if you've ever wondered about this, it's your lucky day because this all goes back to Latin and this particular compound, cone plus the duke root. What does cone mean? We've seen this before. It means something like with or together. So the literal meaning of conduct is to lead together. Now, this makes some sense when it comes to symphonies, because if you are the conductor of a symphony, you are leading everybody together, hopefully in unison, in harmony at the same time. Why does electricity get conducted? Well, it's getting led together with the wire or the metal that's conducting it, and that's essentially why we say that electricity gets conducted. So this is the connection between symphonies and electricity. They both have something to do with leading people or electricity together along with something else. We have another word in English that comes from this root, and that is conducive. Conducive is an adjective that means literally likely to lead to something. So if I'm teaching you in a way that is conducive to your learning, it's helpful to your learning, literally it's likely to lead to you learning. And so you can see how conduct and conducive both fundamentally share that same meaning of leading together towards some specific goal. Let's look at another compound. We're going to keep looking at compounds for the rest of this safari because, as I said, there are a lot of them, and you can probably think of some off the top of your head. So let's see if you can guess where we're going with some of these. Let's look at reduce, and of course the noun is reduction that we do get from that particular root. Now, what does re mean in Latin? Re is a prefix that means back or again. So if you redo something, you're leading it back, and the idea is that you're leading it back to a previous or a lower state. So when you reduce anything, you're lowering it, right? That's essentially what reduce means. So that's pretty obvious once you know what re means and what you know what the duke root means. Let's keep going and look at another compound. How about produce? We have produce as a verb and a noun. We have product as a noun, and then we have production as a noun, and these all come from pro plus the Duke root. Now, what does pro mean in Latin? Pro means forth or forward. It can mean a few other things too, but in the context of this particular compound, that's what it means. So what does it literally mean to produce something? You're leading it forth. And what does that mean? Metaphorically speaking, it means you're leading it forth into the light of day. In other words, you're creating it, right? That's another way that you can talk about producing something, is creating it. But once you break down etymologically the word produce, it literally means to lead forth. A product with the T on the end is something that has been produced, so you can see that past participle in action there. It is something that has had producing done to it, and therefore it is a product. And then production with that shun ending just says that it's a noun that talks about what this whole process is, right? Okay, so we have produce, product, production that are compounds of the Duke root. Let's put the last two slides together. Let's put re and pro together with the Duke root, and what do we get? Of course, we get reproduce or reproduction. All you have to do is add those two meanings together to get what this word and this family of words literally means. It means to lead forth. That's the pro plus the Duke part. And then you throw in the re part, and it means again. So it means to lead forth again. In other words, to create again in the same way that you have created or somebody has created before. And essentially, when we're talking about living things reproducing, that's what we mean. We are talking about them creating new life, but they're not creating random new life on random new patterns. They're creating new life on the same patterns that they were created on and that their ancestors were created on. So when you break up all of the parts in the word reproduce, it all really makes sense when you put it together, when you know these Latin words. Okay, let's keep going and look at more compounds of Duke. How about seduce? You may not have thought about this, but seduce and seduction also have the Duke root in them. What does the se part mean at the beginning in Latin? Se is a word or a prefix that means away or away from. So if you put these two together, what do you get? Seduce means to lead away, and the metaphorical extension of this word, in other words, what we really mean when we say seduce, isn't just to lead away, but it's to lead away from the straight and narrow path. That's kind of the idea of seducing anybody. Whatever you're seducing them into, you're leading them away. You're causing them to do something that is leaving the normal way that they would take, or leaving the way that society says they should take, or what they should do. And ultimately, that's all seduce and seduction really mean. Okay, let's keep going. We got more compounds coming here. How about introduce or introduction? Intro is the Latin prefix that means inward. So again, if you put these two together, you can see where we're going here. If you introduce somebody to somebody else, you are leading them into that person's knowledge or acquaintance. On the other hand, similarly speaking, but in a slightly different way, if you introduce a book, or if you're reading the introduction to a book, that's the thing that is leading you into the book, right? It's getting you acquainted with the book. It's getting you to know the book. It may be an author's introduction that tells you about what the book is supposed to be about or whatever. But either way, you can see how introduce could mean to introduce somebody to somebody else, leading them into their acquaintance, or to start a book and show what the book is about and maybe why the author wrote it, or give you a heads up about the main characters or something like that. Okay, what other compounds? We have induce, so this is like introduce, but it's a little bit more simple because it's just induce. Latin in means in or into, so it's kind of like intro, and of course they are etymologically related in Latin, but that is basically what Latin in means. So when you induce somebody to do something, what does that mean? It means you're leading somebody into an action. You're trying to get them to do that action. That's what it means to induce somebody. Then we have a word like induct. If you induct somebody into something, that's called an induction. So obviously those words are connected to each other. What does it mean to induct somebody into something? You know this if you've ever been inducted into anything. It means to lead somebody into a group. When you get inducted into a group, you are being led into the group by the people who were already part of the group beforehand, and then you are now part of the group. We also get the adjective inductive from this compound in plus the Duke root. Inductive reasoning is a particular kind of reasoning that is characterized by leading into general conclusions from specific examples. And so a lot of people have a hard time keeping different kinds of reasoning straight, but if you know their etymologies, that can really help you kind of understand what inductive reasoning means. The other kind of reasoning that we talk about a lot is deductive, and we have the verb deduce, like I deduced something. Now, this comes from another compound from the duc root in Latin. Of course, this compound is de plus duco. What does the preposition de mean in Latin? It can mean from or away from or even down. So all of those meanings are kind of inherent in the idea of deducing something or using deductive reasoning. It means to lead away from one point to another. You start with one particular point or something that is known, and then you lead away from it toward other things. And that's basically what deductive reasoning is. It's characterized by leading away from, in this case, general truths, things that we think we know, to specific conclusions that can be deduced from those general conclusions. Of course, we get another word that we use all the time from this particular compound of duc, and that is deduct or deduction. If you have a teacher and they deduct points, they are leading points away from your original score, or they're taking points down, there's the down idea, from your original score. So you can see how deduct and deduction ultimately come from this root. And of course, our word deduction can actually mean either of these two things. If you have a deduction, it could be something that you have deduced, or it could be you losing points. So we actually use that noun in either of those ways that has something to do with leading something down. But you really have to dig into the etymology to understand why we use the word deduction for both of those things. Let's keep going and look at another compound of duc. There's abduct, or the noun abduction. What does this mean? The Latin preposition ab just means from or away. So this is actually one of the simpler ones we're going to look at. If you abduct somebody, which you shouldn't do, don't do that. But if you abduct somebody, that means to lead them away from somewhere. If you get abducted by aliens, or if you are the victim of an alien abduction, literally that means you have just been led away by aliens. Obviously, usually the idea is it's a little more violent than that, or you don't really necessarily get a choice. So lead away is kind of a nice way of saying it, but that is literally what this word means. If you know anything about anatomy, you know we have abductor muscles. What is an abductor muscle? It comes from ab plus duco, and it's a muscle that leads away from the center line of your body. So if you have an abductor muscle, it's something that helps you move your arm out, not in, but out. That's an abductor muscle. And if you know anatomy, you know the opposite of that, which I'm not going to put up on the screen, is an adductor muscle, because ad, A-D, is the Latin word for to or toward the center of your body. Okay, here's another cool word that we get from the duc root. This is actually not a compound that is based on a preposition plus duco. This is a compound that is based on a noun plus duco, because as many of you probably know, even if you don't know anything about Latin, the Latin word aqua means water. If you know Spanish, we get agua from this, and of course it's still aqua in Italian, right? So this is a common word for water all over Europe because it comes from the Latin word for water. So what is an aqueduct? Literally, an aqueduct is just something that leads water from one place to another, and that's really all that compound means. One more compound that we're going to end on, and of course this is a compound that is near and dear to my heart. This compound is educate, and this is from a plus duc plus an ending ate. And you know what that ending is in Latin if you know Latin, but we don't need to get into it. This comes from the Latin preposition a, sometimes spelled x, so it can have that x on the end of it or not. Either way, here it does not, which means out of. So if you put those two ideas together, a plus duco, what do you get? It means to lead somebody out of something. Now, how does that have anything to do with to educate somebody? How does that have anything to do with education? It has this metaphorical meaning of leading somebody out of a state of ignorance into a state of knowledge. So it's really cool to dive into these different compounds and see the metaphors that are behind them. See how the Romans thought and see how later people thought when they sometimes coined these metaphors for themselves or borrowed them into their own language. So the whole idea of education is really a metaphor. You are leading somebody out of a state of ignorance into a state of knowledge. How cool is that? I hope you feel educated now that you've watched this particular safari. That's it. We've kind of done a whirlwind tour through a bunch of different compounds that come from duco. I hope you've been able to make some connections that you haven't been able to make before that all go back to this root duc in Latin. Go ahead and comment if you have any other duc words that you think I left out that are really important, and I look forward to engaging with you in the comment section.